I went to church and came back to nothing. It was a Sunday like any other. I woke early the way I always did. Made my tea. Pressed the blue blouse I saved for Sundays. I even added a small pearl brooch, the one Paul gave me on our 25th anniversary. Today's sermon is about forgiveness, I whispered to myself. God always has a way of speaking what we need. I didn't know then that today I would need more forgiveness than I'd ever known how to give. The service was beautiful. The choir sang my favorite hymn. His eye is on the sparrow. I closed my eyes, felt the sun through the stained glass window, and for a moment I forgot everything. My loneliness, my aching knees, even how distant my son had been lately. I prayed for him. I always did, even though he barely visited anymore. Even though he stopped calling me Mom and just said Ma. Even though his wife looked at me like I was just an obligation. Still, I prayed, because that's what mothers do. But when I got home, something was wrong. The front porch was quiet, too quiet. The potted plant I always kept by the steps was gone. The rocking chair was missing. My heart skipped. I reached into my purse for my keys, unlocked the gate, stepped onto the porch, and slid my key into the door. It didn't fit. I tried again. Then I stopped. Because taped to the door was a note written in my son's handwriting. Don't worry, Ma, you'll be fine. We've arranged something better. I couldn't breathe. I knocked. No answer. I called his phone. Voicemail. I sat on the porch, the one I had swept every week, the one where I rocked his babies to sleep, and stared at that note like it was written in another language. Better. What could possibly be better than my home? My pictures were inside. My books, my Bible, my memories. And now I was locked out. The neighbor came over Mrs. King from across the street. She saw me sitting there with my purse in my lap like a lost child. Joan, she asked, you okay? I shook my head. They changed the locks while I was at church. She gasped. Your own son? I nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I let someone see me cry. That night I slept in a spare room. Mrs. King offered me her guest bed. She made chamomile tea, sat beside me in silence. And when I finally fell asleep, it wasn't peace, it was exhaustion. Because peace doesn't come when your child treats you like a stranger. It doesn't come when you're locked out of your own life. But something else did come that night. A seed of something I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge. Not anger. But resolve. We found you a place, the lie behind the locks. The morning after I sat quietly at Mrs. King's table, she handed me a slice of toast and said, you should call him again, Joan. I didn't want to, but I did. And this time, he picked up. Ma, it's done. Just accept it. That was the first thing he said. Not, are you okay? Not, where did you sleep? Not even, I'm sorry. Just cold, flat, like I was a task crossed off a list. We found you a place. Assisted living, good reviews. You'll have company. I couldn't even process it. You changed my locks without asking. You didn't even give me my Bible, my photos. It's for the best, he said. You're not getting any younger. I wasn't getting any younger, but I wasn't dead. How dare he talk like I was already gone? I had breath in my lungs. I cooked for him until he was 22. I wiped fevers-covered nightmare-stitched shirts stayed up when he missed curfew. And now, without warning, I was just a liability to be moved. I asked him one thing. Can I at least see the house, pack my things? He hesitated. It's complicated. Jen already started moving some stuff out. Yen, his wife, the woman who never looked me in the eye. The woman who once whispered, she's in the way. I should have seen it coming. But love has a way of blinding you, especially when it's your own child. Mrs. King drove me there. Anyway, I stood outside the home I once knew. My curtains were gone. A for sale soon sign leaned against the wall. My garden looked trampled. The doormat, my old one, that said, bless this house, was in the trash bin. That's when it hit me. They weren't planning to let me back in at all. This wasn't about helping me. This was about getting rid of me. But I wasn't done yet. If they thought they could erase me quietly, they had forgotten something very important. I wasn't a fragile old lady. I was Joan Miller, and I had built a life from nothing before. I could do it again. But first, I had to get my life back. My photos, my letters, my name. I didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't go on the news or call the police. Instead, I asked Mrs. King for a ride to the church. Not to pray this time, but to talk to Pastor Reynolds. You still have a voice, Joan. That's what he told me when I sat down in his office. I told him everything, the note on the door. The son I raised now, treating me like a piece of furniture to be moved. You still have a voice, Joan, he said gently. You're not invisible, not to God, not to us. He made a few calls, then handed me a number. This woman helps seniors in situations like yours. Quietly, legally. Her name was Sylvia, a paralegal, sharp, compassionate, and furious on my behalf. Do you have proof? You live there? I nodded. My name is on the water bill. I've lived there 19 years. Paid for the washer. Bought the stove. She smiled. Then we'll start there. And just like that, I wasn't powerless anymore. Meanwhile, my son sent me brochures. Yes, brochures. Whispering Pines Senior Community, Sunset View Homes. As if I were shopping for a cruise. I didn't respond. Didn't yell. I just circled the photo of a woman in the brochure, smiling alone in a room with no windows, and mailed it back. No note, just the circle. The next Sunday, I didn't go to church. I stood outside my own home. Waited. Watched. And when they drove off him and Jen, I walked to the side gate. Mrs. King had remembered the old spare key we hid under the garden stone. It was still there. I opened the shed. Inside boxes. Labeled Mom's stuff. As if I'd died. I took one box, just one. The one marked Miss, junk. Inside was my Bible, my wedding ring in a pouch, photos of my mother, my journal. They thought it was junk, but it was the proof of who I was. And with that box in my arms, I walked back to Mrs. King's, holding not just my memories, but my voice. Back at Mrs. King's, I laid everything from the box across the bed. My Bible, my wedding ring, the family photos. Even the receipt from the couch I bought after Paul passed. These weren't junk. They were chapters of my life. Proof I had been and still was the heart of that home. I started writing letters. Not angry ones, not accusations, but truths. To my son, when you were 5, you cried because I was 5 minutes late picking you up from school. That's how much I mattered to you. Do you remember? To my granddaughter, I still have the picture you drew of us holding hands in your dream house. I was always on the porch waiting for you. To myself, you were never useless. You were quietly essential. And then I made a decision, not revenge, not pity, but something far more powerful, visibility. I contacted the local church group offered to volunteer with the senior program. I showed up to every Sunday service not to hide, but to be seen. I sat in the front pew, I smiled, I hugged. And when people asked how I was, I said, I'm between chapters, but I'm not closing the book. And then the rumors came back to them. It didn't take long. A friend of Jen's saw me leading a prayer circle. Another saw me reading scripture at a food bank. Another said I looked glowing. They thought I'd disappear into a nursing home like a ghost. Instead, I was rebuilding. Without rage, without begging. Just living so boldly that they had to ask themselves, did we misjudge her? The next letter was from a lawyer, not mine. Theirs. They offered me a settlement, enough to ease the transition. I laughed. I didn't want their money. I wanted my dignity, my story, my home. So I gave the letter to Sylvia. She smiled, tucked it into a folder, and said, let's remind them who paid for the front door they locked. Sylvia was quiet for a moment, flipping through the folder filled with property receipts, bank statements, and utility bills, all in my name. Then she looked at me and said, Joan, you never left that house. They did. I blinked. Legally, she explained, if we show you were contributing, paying, maintaining, and listed, you still have rights. You're not a guest. You're a resident. And that changed everything. It meant the lock change was illegal. It meant they couldn't sell the house without involving me. It meant their plan to quietly erase me was going to backfire loudly. Sylvia prepared a formal letter. We served it to my son and his wife the next Monday morning. It wasn't angry, it was factual. Mrs. Joan Miller retains legal occupancy rights and is entitled to recover her belongings, continue residence, or negotiate equitable compensation for any proposed change in housing. Translation, you can't just throw her away. They called that same afternoon. Why are you doing this, Ma? He asked, his voice shaking, not with remorse but with fear. Doing what I said calmly, defending my place in this world. He was quiet. I added, you already made your choice. Now I'm making mine. The church rallied around me. Word spread quickly. The woman who never missed Sunday. The grandmother who made casseroles for the food drives. The widow who had prayed over strangers for years was now the one being betrayed. Letters came, cards. Even 2 deacons came to visit me at Mrs. King's with groceries and hugs. And one of them said, you always made others feel seen. Now it's our turn. And I cried. Not because I was broken, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt held. Then came the knock on the door. It was my son, standing on Mrs. King's porch with his head slightly lowered. I opened the door, arms crossed. I came to talk. I nodded, let him sit, didn't offer tea, didn't smile. He looked around, saw the modest living room filled with my memories, photos, my Bible, the old rosary on the wall. You really made a life here, he muttered. No, I said. I kept my life. You just weren't looking. The conversation that was years overdue. He sat on the couch like it still belonged to him, like I still belonged to him. But I had changed, and silence now had more power than all the shouting in the world. You act like I don't love you, that's what he said. I just looked at him. You locked the door I raised you behind. He flinched. I was overwhelmed, Ma. Jen kept saying it wasn't safe, that you'd fall or forget the stove. We didn't want to lose you. So instead I said, you tried to erase me? His mouth opened, then closed. We were trying to protect you. I stared right into his eyes and whispered, protection without consent is just control. Then I told him a story he forgot. When you were 10, I began, you brought home a stray dog. Dad said no, you cried. But I let you keep her. He nodded, confused. I didn't agree with the dog, I continued, but I saw how much she meant to you. I respected that. You don't have to agree with my life, son, but I earned your respect, and you gave me none. The first tear fell down his cheek. He looked like a boy again. My boy. The one who used to hold my hand too tight on his way to kindergarten. What do you want me to do? He whispered. I leaned in. I want you to stop deciding what I need and start listening to what I say I need. Silence. Then, okay, we wrote a new agreement that week. With Sylvia's help, we drafted a co-occupancy agreement. I would return to my home, my name on the deed. He and Jen would relocate temporarily. I would choose whether or not to sell. But more than that, we made verbal promises. I'd never be locked out again. He'd never assume silence meant surrender. And if he ever felt overwhelmed, he'd speak to me, not for me. And on the first morning back, I walked through the front door of my home, put on the kettle, touched the worn handle of the oven I'd scrubbed for 20 years, opened the curtains I once picked with Paul, and as the light flooded in, I whispered, you didn't lose me, you just forgot who I was. The first night I slept in my own bed again, I didn't cry. I didn't mourn the past. I thanked it, because it taught me something I never dared to believe before. That I wasn't just someone's mother, I was someone, period. Neighbors started asking questions. They saw me come and go, smiling, dressed in soft blues and floral prints again, holding grocery bags, planting basil in the front yard like I used to. Joan, are you back for good? No, I said with a wink. I'm here for better. Word spread. That poor woman whose son locked her out was radiant, was leading a senior Bible study, was hosting tea afternoons for other grandmothers whose families had grown distant. One afternoon, my granddaughter showed up. Her name is Ellie. She stood on the porch, nervously clutching a sketch pad. Dad said you might not want to see me. I smiled, opened the door. That's his story, not mine. Come in, baby. She came in, and we sat by the window. I thought you were gone, she whispered. No, I said, just misplaced. She handed me a drawing me in my apron, cooking in the kitchen sun rays behind me like I was a saint. I never stopped drawing you. And just like that, everything inside me softened. I began teaching the forgotten ones. There are so many like me, women who cooked and cleaned, folded and ironed, sacrificed and swallowed sorrow for years, and were called useless. So I started a weekly circle called Still Here. We talked, we cried, we wrote letters to our younger selves. We danced sometimes badly, but joyfully. You are not leftovers, I'd remind them. You are legacy. One day, Jen sent me a letter. It wasn't long. She apologized. Not with excuses, but with honesty. I saw you as a task, not a person. I was wrong. If you'll have me, I'd like to come over for tea. And I said yes, not because I forgot, but because I'd grown. Jen sat on the same couch where months earlier, my son had tried to explain away betrayal with fear. But she didn't come with excuses. She came with a pie and trembling hands. I didn't see you, that's what she said. You were here feeding us, folding our clothes, listening, showing up. But I only saw the laundry, the dinners, the silence. And when silence didn't serve me anymore, I decided you were no longer useful. Her words didn't feel like poison. They felt like release, because I'd carried those invisible wounds too long. But now someone was naming them, and the naming was healing. I poured us tea, just like I used to. Chamomile, 2 sugars, no milk. We didn't talk much that first hour. But near the end, she reached into her purse and pulled out something wrapped in velvet. It's not yours, she said. I know that, but I want you to have it. I opened it, a ring, not the one they sold, but something else. I bought this after I saw you lead prayer at the shelter. I realized you're the strongest woman I've ever met. This doesn't make up for anything. It's just a symbol of what I see now. And for the first time, I believed her not because she said it, but because I no longer needed her to. Her opinion wasn't my mirror anymore. My worth was no longer tied to how they labeled me. I wore that ring not as a replacement, but as a reminder of who I became the moment they tried to erase me. The story didn't end in a hug. It grew into a legacy. That fall, I was invited to speak at a local women's conference. Topic still useful, the power of the overlooked. I stood in front of 300 women, some young, some gray, many, with tears already in their eyes. And I told them this. You don't age out of purpose. You don't retire from dignity. You don't lose your place in the world just because someone else misplaces your name. And they stood not out of pity, but out of recognition. Because my story wasn't just mine. It was theirs. It was yours. It's the quiet strength of women who carried generations, then got labeled burdens, until one day they remembered themselves. That winter, I rearranged the furniture in the house, not out of boredom, but out of ownership. For the first time in decades, I wasn't setting the table for someone else's needs. I was setting it for my own peace. Every room became a declaration. The living room sunlight soft pillows my knitting in a basket by the window. The kitchen spices I loved, not the bland ones they preferred. Bread rising because I liked the smell. Music playing not for background noise, but for joy. The hallway lined with photos of people I chose to remember, not just the ones who shared my blood. I wasn't waiting anymore. For years I had waited. Waited to be seen. Waited for an apology. Waited for them to remember that I mattered. But now, I saw myself. I remembered who I was. And I had stopped asking for permission to exist. One Sunday, Ellie brought her friends. She called ahead. "Grandma, my friends from school want to meet you. They said you sound like a movie character." I laughed. "Tell them I make cookies too." They arrived 4 teenage girls, awkward and curious. We sat in the living room, and they asked me about love aging being forgotten. I told them the truth. People may leave, titles may be stripped, locks may change. But your spirit, that's yours, forever. They cried. We laughed. They asked to come again. I wrote a letter that night to myself. It read, "Dear Joan, you didn't just survive what they did. You transformed it. And that is not something every woman gets to do. You walked back into the house they locked you out of, not to reclaim a place, but to reclaim yourself." I sealed it, dated it, tucked it behind the old family photo in the hallway. Some stories don't end, they evolve. This isn't a revenge story. It's not even about forgiveness. It's about becoming. Becoming the version of yourself that no one expected. Especially the people who thought they could silence you. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when I realized something strange. I hadn't checked my phone in 2 days. No messages from my son. No half apologies. No just checking in texts. And yet, I was perfectly at peace because I had stopped waiting for crumbs and started preparing a feast for my own soul. I took myself on a date. I put on my best dress, the blue one with tiny white flowers that made me feel like me, went to the little cafe downtown, ordered chamomile tea and a slice of lemon cake, sat by the window and watched the world rush by. A couple beside me asked if I was waiting for someone. No, I smiled. I am the someone. They laughed politely, but I meant it. I started writing my own book, literally. A memoir not just for me, but for every woman who's ever felt like furniture in her own home. Who gave until her hands cracked, her voice faded, and still wasn't seen. The title, Still Here. And in the first page, I wrote, "They locked the door, they threw away the key. But I was the house all along." Then came the phone call. It was my son. His voice was nervous, brittle. "Mom, I wanted to say I don't expect anything. I just wanted to know if you were okay." I closed my eyes. Years ago, I would have dropped everything to console him. But now, I took a breath. "I'm not just okay," I said. "I'm finally living. And I hope one day you'll get to feel that too." And that's the real ending, not a reconciliation, not revenge. But a woman, in her own home with her own name, living a chapter she wrote herself. No one else gets to decide your worth. And if they try, change the locks on them.